Hello and welcome back, fellow time travelers and comic book aficionados. Today I had the opportunity to go to the Windy City Pulp and Paper Convention, and what they had there was unique. It was Pulp Fiction magazines from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and a little bit beyond, and beautiful artwork, painted covers, and a lot of writing inside of stories that featured westerns, space, science fiction, romance. Titles of the pulp fiction genre included Amazing Stories, which was one of the first and the first pulp fiction that explored the science fiction realm. Argosy magazine was also featured, including thrilling stories and Planet Stories. And it's interesting to note that Planet Stories Pulp Fiction gave way to the comic book of the Planet Comics by Fiction House. So it was great to see how Pulp Fiction and this convention and these books were right at the precursor, right before the comic books that make up the golden age. So I was able to pick up a badge to get into the convention center at the hotel and look at a number of covers and flipping through what the vendors had. So today I want to show you a sampling of some things that I picked up, mostly comic related, because a few of those vendors happen to actually have comic books, but not your modern ones, not any Bronze Age, not much Silver Age, but primarily some Golden Age books. I'm going to show you what I picked up. The first book featured more of a jungle comics theme, and this is by Atlas Comics. And we have right here Jungle Girl, Lorna, and what a neat cover right here, kind of getting through the tribesmen and showing off her fierceness. You can see some of the artwork inside the book. This book came out in 1955. So it's interesting to see a lot of these covers in pulp fictions and stories and that transition to comic books like this one right here, and finally getting the pictures and pictorial debut in the comic book. And it was neat to see the history, kind of looking at Pulp Fiction as the godfather of Golden Age comics. So feast your eyes on this. Super fun and also a great read. Another book that I picked up at the con featured Dagwood and Blondie in this book from April of 1945. And here we have Dagwood with some stray puppies underneath an umbrella on a rainy day waiting at the bus stop. It's only fair to say that April showers bring May flowers, and this is a fun action cover here. Magic Comics housed a lot of great strips from the syndicated newspaper strip featuring Agent X, Popeye, of course Blondie, Mandrake the Magician, and much more. And some of the artwork you can see right there of the fun, whimsical strips. So it's neat to see at this convention all these old books from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, including this book from 1945. A great series, a lot of great strips compiled into these books to be kind of an archive. And this happened to be issue number 69, featuring some great stories. And look at the advertisement in the back. You have a very fun clock where they rotate the characters in and out. And just happy to have picked this up at that convention. And the year 1945 was well represented, as I have another book from that year, and this happens to be Popular Comics, another syndicated collection featuring this time not Popeye or Mandrake the Magician, but Felix the Cat, Smiling Jack, and Terry and the Pirate. They were featured in numerous American newspapers at the time. And all the stories are divided up and presented in this book here. Looking there, you can see some of the artwork, some of the fun and gags, as it was meant to be for kids, young adults, and not so much the dark, austere type of stories that were more for the older adults. A lot of what was in the convention featured detective stories, horror stories, as well as stories about fantasy and science fiction. And this is the transition where comic books were starting to appear in this Golden Age series there. Popular Comics. Really fun. What I enjoyed most about the Pulp and Paper Con was looking at all the beautifully drawn covers. I'm always drawn to science fiction, where you see artfully drawn rocket ships whizzing by planets, male and female astronauts exploring different terrain, and oftentimes having to battle monsters and creatures, some with tentacles and some with major appendages grabbing them. And it's just so neat to see how that is portrayed. Even the Art Deco style that we know from the 20s and 30s, translating into these movie poster-like covers. And it just, I can't describe how neat those covers are. A book that caught my eye, a low-grade comic book, happened to be the more rare EC Comics, and I saw a Jack Davis cover right here with this incredible science fiction magazine from 1955. You can see some water damage in the fading, but the artwork is still intact as we have our fearsome beast coming at the exploring astronaut, unsuspecting the dangers ahead. We have the rocket coming up right here in the margin in this boxed out type of artwork featuring the action. Kind of reminiscent of the Marvel books in the Copper and Bronze Age, where they have that box. EC did it first back in 1955. You can see the signature was Jack Davis, and just how the lady is drawn and taking a name right there. So this book is pretty low grade. It has beautiful artwork here in the heading, and I'll show you some of the artwork right there. You can see the rocket ships and the astronauts stepping out into this new unexplored territory, which makes for a lot of thrill and action. This book also came with another cover that was detached from another book, and it's Piracy, issue number 1, and it's just the front cover. There's a lot of fading from water damage, but you can see that here too. So with this find, I was able to get a couple different covers right here from the infamous EC comic group. So fast forwarding from 1945 and 1955, I have a book from 1962, and always one of my favorites from Charlton Comics. And here we have another space cover with the rocket ship, our astronaut, just like we were talking about. And this happens to be Strange Suspense Stories, a compilation of different stories, usually featuring science fiction. So this was what inspired a lot of these books, was the pulp fiction that came before them. Some of the books, it should be noted, were almost $4,000 to $5,000, including the first issue of Amazing Stories, which is one of the earliest and best known science fiction books that contained the pulp genre and magazine. So some of all of that stems and eventually evolved into what comic books did later on in the 50s and 60s. So we have Pulp Fiction to really thank for that. Looking at the viewer, you can see some of the artwork in this book. And again, it features some of the greats like Steve Ditko, Rocky Mastricerio, Vince Alacia, drawing what they were perceiving as space in the future. And it's interesting to note, even with the technology and all, going into the future, they're still encountering dinosaur-like monsters. So really neat, and we have to thank Charlton Comics for kind of preserving that history. As we get closer to the present, we begin to see a decline in pulp fiction being created and produced. Toward the 1960s and 70s, not many books were being produced featuring those beautiful covers and the writing inside of many stories. Comic books were taking over, and some of the remnants that we saw from the pulp era are starting to show and persist in the 70s, including these from the early 70s with DC's Strange Adventure. So they follow that similar format of highlighting the stories inside, and just like we saw with the EC comic book, that squared off picture with the action right there. So I was able to pick these up for $5 a piece, but they hold true to the genre of science fiction. And this is what pulp fiction allowed to happen for comic book. Seeing these fun splash pages, usually scientists working on diabolical experiments, DC was able to give us these fun pages, and Murphy Anderson typically drew them. And this is just an example of that. So now in the 70s, pulp fiction is beginning to fade, and comic books are still holding on to the fun that was from that era. Anybody need to catch up on their old favorite radio program? This was an advertisement in the lobby of the convention, and need to see a vintage radio and advertising a CD with the different programs on there. So it was neat to see this. It kind of caught my eyes. I do enjoy some of the vintage radio technology. And from Heritage Auction, a beautiful spread of different covers that they were auctioning and artwork. So you can see here the shadow that we know the DC eventually picked up, and this kind of frightful cover right there. We have here the Lone Ranger. We have Weird Tales, which is a common Pulp Fiction book that was out at the time. Mystery, All Detective. Sometimes they're true crime books as well. Doc Savage has his origins in Pulp Fiction that we know in the comic book. But what's nice about this little pamphlet circular is they do a great job of showing the different covers, including the dates and some facts about it as well. So just a nice thing to take a look at. And this is what I saw time and again. These are the kind of books that were in the display cases or neatly organized in boxes. And they really grab your eye. Whether the fiction inside was of good value or a good read or was just simply kind of hokey, it was up to the reader, because after all, art is in the eye of the beholder. So this was a nice little pamphlet provided by the Heritage Auction to showcase some of the Pulp Fiction books. So all in all, it was something new, a little bit different from a comic convention, because typically comic conventions have toys and figures and also different books from different genres. But this was before all that. This was Pulp Fiction, and a really neat time to see the godfather of comic books and what they were going for. As mentioned before, one of the Pulp Fiction books was for $5,000, so there's a market for that too. So thank you for watching as we looked at some different Golden Age books, and until next time, thank you.